Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News channel, independent and impartial. This is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show today. We'll be taking a look at a new book by photojournalists James Oatway and Alon Skye. They document through their lenses the story of xenophobia in South Africa, highlighting the contribution to photojournalism in reporting. As the South African Editors Forum plots a course forward to improve the quality of journalism in the country, it's been hosting a series of webinars in a lead-up to a conference that will address some of the critical elements that came through the Satchwell inquiry into media ethics and credibility. We also find out what happens, what's been coming through actually from those webinars. In our regular feature back in news history, our feature takes us back to August 2010 when a South African journalist was arrested by the Hawks. Do you remember who that journalist was? Find out a little later in the program. We also have our regular feature, the newspaper review. That'll be coming up a little bit later on. And so that's what's on the program, that's what's on the show, and it's a full show indeed. But before we begin, let's catch you up with what's on the front pages of today's newspapers. And we start with the Sunday Times. And the Sunday Times has the suspended ANC Secretary-General Ace Magashule on its front page, saying that the party has cast defiant Magashule into the political wilderness yesterday when its National Executive Committee kicked him out of its virtual meeting, effectively confirming his suspension from the party as Secretary-General position. The next paper is the City Press. Also Magashule on the front there, and the headline is Magashule tries to break the NEC. The paper's reporting that as ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa lamented disunity and chaos in the party, the suspended Secretary-General's allies are plotting to collapse the party's top structure and force an early elective conference. And the paper says that the suspended SG is fighting on all fronts and is also holding on to the keys of his office at Luthuli House. The Sunday Independent, let's take a look at that. That leads with a story about President Cyril Ramaphosa and Gauteng Judge President Dunstan Malambo with the allegations that the President manipulated the judge into the handling of a court case involving former State Security Agency Director General Arthur Fraser to save the career of Inspector General of Intelligence Dr. Setlo Mamaru Dintwe in 2018. That's according to an affidavit deposed at the Zondo Commission, resulting from a series of phone calls between President Ramaphosa and Judge Malambo. And just to say that Judge Malambo has denied all of these allegations. The Sunday Tribune, well, that's reporting that King Misuzulu is now on the throne with contesting litigation against this now formally withdrawn. And this follows weeks of tensions and the reading of Queen Regent Mantombi's will. King Misuzulu Ka Zwelithini can finally look forward to his coronation. The announcement that he was the preferred successor came amid tensions in the royal family, which had divided the princes and the princesses into two factions. Talks apparently have resolved the issues, and King Misuzulu Ka Zwelithini has already assumed his royal duties with formalities to follow later. The Weekend Argus on Sunday is reporting that 800 police officers have abused the use of state vehicles with disciplinary charges ranging from drunk driving to hit-and-run incidents in the Western Cape over the past 3 years. It's believed that as many as 66 police officers are currently being investigated for abuse of state vehicles. and another 25 are undergoing disciplinary action. Incredibly, there are 30 cases at the moment of police officers under caution for drunk driving. And the Sunday World is leading with a story of musician, rapper, AKA, and his late fiancée, Anele Tembe. The paper is reporting that in the days leading to her death, the couple's relationship was nothing as the pictures on social media suggested, with claims of drug abuse, violence, physical abuse coming through. The paper says that it has it on good authority that there was a violent commotion in their hotel room just before Tembe's alleged death by suicide. Something the paper adds that the police have triggered an investigation. All right, so that's what's on the front pages of your newspapers, and we'll be chatting to a guest editor, to tell us a little bit more about some of those stories a little bit later on. But first, let's take a look at some of the trending topics on social media today, because after all, many of you, that's where you get your news nowadays, isn't it? So these are the top 5 trends as of a short while ago, and some of them similar, 3 sacred spaces always every week, but the number one trend today has got to be Mother's Day. And so you will see a lot of pictures like this. Happy Mother's Day, and I hope you've been sending messages as well to your moms. Supriya says the whole world in one person. Mother love, happy Mother's Day 2020. You'll see lots of these pictures today and lots of these messages. Happy Mother's Day to this Queen Mvelo Pumba, loving wife and best of all, loving mother. Yeah, lovely messages indeed. And there you go. And you'll see lots of these kinds of pictures. And I hope that you guys are going to be spoiling your moms during the course of today, because it is their day. Happy Mother's Day to all mums. And this guy looks happy, doesn't he? The only love in my life, happy Mother's Day, and that's Shubham. All right, and this, I love this picture in particular. Ravish says, no love is greater than mother's love. Love you, Mum, first and always. Happy Mother's Day 2021. All right, so that is what's trending on social media, and the program starts right now. Now, for our first story today, we take a look at South African photojournalist James Otway and Alon Skye's new photographic book titled Brother, which is published in partnership with the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center and Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung. Photojournalism is described as the process of storytelling using the medium of photography as your main storytelling device. Well, Otway and Skye have used their years of experience in the fields with camera in hand to tell powerful South African stories. And they've captured one of those stories in their book called Brother, and it's about xenophobia since 2008. I caught up with them and asked them to tell me what brought them to bringing this book together.
In 2018, myself and James had an exhibition at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and this coincided with 10 years since the first major outbreak of the violence in 2008 in various areas around Johannesburg. And from there, we decided that this work was gathering dust, and there was a lot of denialism around the issue of xenophobia in South Africa. We decided to contain these images in a book, and that's how it came about.
So, James, both of you have photographed many different scenarios, many different situations in the many years that you've both been photojournalists. What was it about this issue that you felt compelled to record even more?
Yeah, so you know, as Alon mentioned, 2008 was when we saw our first really major big outbreak of violence. And, you know, at the time, I mean, that was, what was it, 13 years ago? We were much younger then. It was the first time we'd seen anything like this. And we were shocked by what we saw. But then then after 2008, finally, after the 30 or more days of violence, you know, the violence started to quieten down a bit. And then quite a long time went by without us seeing any fresh outbreaks. There had been isolated incidents, but there wasn't a big outbreak of violence. So, you know, we thought, okay, maybe we've seen the last of that. You know, we were praying, like, maybe we've seen the last of that. But then in 2015, you know, we started seeing, you know, the return of these outbreaks of violence. And, you know, to us, you know, personally, it made us really, you know, upset because, you know, what we saw in 2008 was so traumatic. You know, it had so many people were killed and so many people were displaced. And we just really, you know, it kind of made us angry that no one is doing anything to address the root cause of this violence. You know, obviously the cause lies in, you know, the fact that there's so much poverty, you know, in South Africa, in urban areas. And this affects South Africans as well as migrants. But it doesn't matter, you know, what you say, there's no justification to actually carrying on the violence. So that's why we really have decided to stick with this issue, to try and get as much awareness about the issue of xenophobia as we can.
They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And when I look at some of the pictures that you guys took, I mean, they're pretty hard to look at, some of them. It must have been even harder to take them.
Yeah, I think it's always shocking and traumatic to be witness to these events, but of course, more so for the people that are on the receiving end of these violent attacks. And yeah, we covered a lot of these incidents, and yeah, they are very hard to look at and confronting, but we think important to show the reality of what is actually going on in our country.
When you look back at some of these pictures, I mean, it is years later, and at the time you're in the heat of the moment and some of your natural instincts kick in. You just keep on clicking. But when you're away from it and look back, I don't know, James, what sort of thoughts go through your mind when you look at some of these pictures?
Well, yeah, that's quite a good question. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's sort of like wounds get opened up, I guess, because, you know, some of these things have been very traumatic to witness. And I actually try not to look at the pictures as much as I can, because every time I do see the pictures, it takes me right back to those moments. And I can almost, you know, smell the smell of the burning rubber and you know, hear the sounds, you know, the calling of the crowd of people, you know, that are baying for blood. It's really, yeah, I don't know, it's quite a difficult process. It was very difficult actually going through our archives to try to select these pictures, because, yeah, you tend to relive those moments.
And for you, Alon?
Yeah, I think it was quite an excruciating process to go through those pictures, because we did have to look at them over and over again. And as James said, it kind of hit home the realities that we face in this country with the violence that's taking place. And I think also you revisit moments from all those years ago when you're going back in the archive, and you're reminded actually of what people were on the receiving end of. So it has been quite a grueling process to look through that work.
So I guess it's a question for both of you. I mean, what do you see as the role of a photojournalist? You know, some of us just have the idea you've got a journalist that goes out and he has to get a photographer to help him with the story. But your own craft is an art in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there is a misconception about the role of a photojournalist. South Africa's got a rich history of photojournalism, from the days of Drum Magazine. There's legends like Peter Magabane, Alf Kamalo, David Goldblatt, lesser known legends like Ernest Cole, who was a real documentarian photographer. And then we've got the likes of Sam Nzima, who photographed, the famous image of Hector Peterson during the 1976 Soweto riots, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important images to come out of South Africa. And to the transition to democracy, we had the likes of the Bang Bang Club. And even today, we've got a lot of very talented contemporary photojournalists, but there's a misunderstanding of the role. As you say, photojournalists aren't considered to be journalists in their own right. They're seen often as almost like you said, as an assistant. But photojournalism, it is journalism. It should stand just in the same light as any sort of other journalism, be it TV, radio, or writing. As you said earlier, picture, tells 1,000 words. And it really helps to humanize issues that are, hidden by numbers or statistics. Something like xenophobia, it really has more impact if you can see the people who are the victims of this violence, as well as the faces of the perpetrators. It makes it a lot more relatable to the viewer.
Yeah, and I think also we are conduits, to tell stories for people who wouldn't ordinarily be able to be at these events as a communication and in the most truthful way possible about what is actually happening. And I think that's also a big part of the role of a photojournalist.
You talked about iconic pictures, and Emmanuel Sithole was one. And I guess you can never know which picture at what time is going to resonate with people in a certain way. Take us to that day, James, and just run through what was going through your mind as this whole thing was unfolding and you were taking these pictures, and then ultimately how it helped really change the story for people beyond that day.
Yeah, so it was 2015, and I was working at the Sunday Times. There had been some violence that started about a week earlier in Durban, and that had spread to Johannesburg. And for several days earlier in the week, we'd been in the CBD photographing, violence, near the hostels and that sort of thing. But on the Friday night, we had heard that it had spread to Alexandra. So early Saturday morning, myself and my colleague, Beauregard Trump, we went out to Alex, and we found, smoldering barricades in the roads, and, you could see there'd been a lot of looting of shops and that sort of thing, but it was relatively quiet. And I was just taking some pictures outside a shop that had been looted when I heard men shouting, and I heard a commotion, and I looked over and I saw people running towards me. So I just instinctively, lifted my camera and started photographing it all the time, getting closer to what was happening. And I could see that there was a man being attacked. What a lot of people don't realize is that, it was only about 30 seconds from when I took the first picture of the attack to the last picture of the attack. So it happened extremely quickly. When I was taking these pictures, I didn't really know how seriously Sithole had been injured. When the attackers noticed me there, they moved away. It was quite a scary moment because they passed very close to me. And at some point, I thought that they might attack me. But they ultimately moved away. And I called to Sithole and told him, look, get out of here, because I was afraid that they might come back. And he did. He got up and he walked away. And I thought, okay, surely his wounds must be superficial. But then a few minutes later, someone called to me that he's fallen down. And then I went back to him and I called Beauregard Trump, who brought the car. And then we took him to a clinic just up the road. Unfortunately, there was no doctor there because the doctor that was supposed to be on duty was apparently a migrant, and he didn't come to work because he had heard about the violence going on. So we lost valuable time in that process. But then we took him to Edenvale Hospital, where unfortunately shortly after we arrived, he was pronounced dead. So yeah, it was a very painful day. But the pictures were run on the front page of the Sunday Times the following day, and it created such an uproar. People were outraged. The army was deployed, the next day. There were protests organized around Africa. And it really, that was the end of that round of violence, at least.
Again, you described this story, and I'm just thinking, you've got this camera to your eye and you're busy taking pictures. Are you not scared? Because in many times you're probably going to be the key evidence of a crime that's going to be committed, and these people probably don't want you taking pictures of it.
Yeah, so often in situations like this, it is very scary. And I can't lie. I think there is an image sometimes of, photojournalists as being tough guys, but ultimately when you're around this level of violence, it's very scary. But you know that you're there to do a job. You're not going to, take crazy risks, but ultimately you have to show the reality of what's happening. And it does mean sometimes putting your body on the line, I guess. But it's what we chose to do. It's what we have to do. It's part of the job.
Alon, how has the job of the photojournalist changed in a world where we have everyone has got a camera phone taking pictures and social media? What has that done to your job as a photojournalist?
Oh, I think with the proliferation of the digital camera, how easy it is to have access to pictures, as well as citizen journalism. People drive past scenes and they can just instantaneously take pictures and send it to a newspaper. I think there is still a very crucial role for a photojournalist because there are a lot of considerations such as the ethics of the job and how you conduct yourself, and also the passion of doing long-term projects, which kind of normal people wouldn't engage in or have to give an insight into stories. So I think there's still a big role for photojournalists, although it's becoming a lot more niche and the industry is shrinking because of the amount of digital kind of images that are uploaded onto the internet every second of the day.
And the battle between video and photographs. I still treasure a really powerful picture, and to the point that I often find myself, even with video, pausing them just to take it in. And I wonder what that is about. As photographers with a photographic eye, what do you think that is?
Do you want to?
Yeah, well, I think it's just having that moment to look at that still image, and there's a power in that moment, and they sometimes call it the decisive moment, where you manage to capture something profound if you're lucky enough to, and these pictures translate into emotion for the viewer. I think there's also of course, a place for the moving image, although we bias in that we holding onto the still picture. But I think it's there's a huge power in reflecting on that moment as opposed to kind of the moving picture.
Yeah, and I agree completely with what Alon's saying about the decisive moment. But there's also some longevity in a photograph. You see a picture up on a wall in a museum or whatever, and it instantly gives you a glimpse into what it was like maybe 100 years ago. So these are moments of time frozen in time, and I suppose it immortalizes the person in the picture and what was happening in that moment.
All right, as we wrap up, both of you, what do you hope this book will do? What are you hoping people will feel when they pick up this book and it's sitting on their coffee tables? Let me start with you, James.
Well, I definitely, as we mentioned, it's a difficult book to read, but it's an important book to read. It's important that people are aware of just how brutal this level of violence is, but also how senseless it is. I mean, to me, it's unacceptable that we can be, committing brutal acts of violence against other human beings for such, silly reasons as they come from another country. I mean, there's other ways to react and other ways to engage problems. You don't have to resort to violence. And I think we want this book to keep xenophobia in the spotlight, to keep people talking about it, so that ultimately, we can see the dangers that lie in intolerance and indifference, but also that, we can do something to prevent this from repeating itself over and over again.
Yeah, I think we initially set out to create a document, a historical document, to reflect the troubled period post-94. It's happening in our country. I think it's also the title of the book, Brother. So it's the togetherness, but it's also the separation. So in order to create an awareness, to see ourselves in each other as well, and to kind of create a dialogue around problems that are happening, and also to kind of as an antidote to the denialism that also happens in this country, that people say there's no issue. I mean, there's of course a big issue that is taking place and still continues to take place on a daily basis as well. And basically, yeah, that's why we created this book.
Now, the South African Editors Forum will be hosting a conference on the 15th of May, which seeks to put together a 5-year plan to improve the quality of journalism in South Africa. In preparation for this meeting, SANEF has been holding webinars looking at specific elements of the Satchwell Inquiry Report's recommendations. The inquiry was commissioned by SANEF to investigate editorial lapses that contributed to the weakening of trust between the media and the public. Well, to tell us a little bit more about this march by the South Africa National Editors Forum towards improving the quality of journalism in the country, I'm now joined by Newsroom Africa's politics editor and SANEF chairperson, Skuy Ngalwa. Skuy, always good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Good to talk to you too, Peter, and thank you for having me.
All right, so you guys have been quite busy in recent weeks, but let's just bring our viewers up to speed. What first inspired the Satchwell inquiry into media ethics and credibility?
I think, Peter, you will agree with me that over the past few years, there have been a number of what we call editorial lapses, a number of stories that were published, and some of them having been withdrawn by their respective publications. But also, there was a lot of debate in public about the trust deficits and the gap that is widening between us as the media, but also in the audiences that consume the work that we do. And if you recall, then there was that big case of the Sunday Times where they withdrew some of those stories related to the SARS rogue unit. And we thought at the time that it was important for us as the media, because we always shine the light on other people's lives. We always hold people accountable. It was important for us to also introspect. And so when we formed the independent inquiry, we formed it as an independent inquiry that was to look at all the issues within the industry. Look at all those ethical lapses, not at the Sunday Times, but look at the entire industry. What are the issues, and also how do we rebuild that trust? And that report, actually by Judge Satchwell, which we released in January, came up with a number of recommendations, Peter, in terms of what they felt we should do as the media to try and rebuild the industry, but also regain some of the trust that may have been lost between ourselves as the media. But more importantly, how to ensure that going forward we continue to produce quality ethical journalism and journalism that moves society. And that's exactly the reason why we thought it important to have that, to commission that independent inquiry, Peter.
All right, so then how have you gone about trying to manifest those recommendations into some kind of reality?
So Peter, the report came out as over 300 pages. I think it's about 313 pages in total. And it was a culmination of no less than 200 documents that the panel had to peruse through, and a number of about 167 individual interviews that they had to do. So they came up with 69 recommendations of what they said we should do as the media going forward. And those recommendations were themed into 8 categories, Peter. So what we then decided to do was that as SANEF, how do we action this report? We decided to have an ethics, a media ethics conference. Now that conference is taking place on the 15th, that is next week, Saturday, but it was preceded by 4 webinars. And those webinars actually dealt with the 8 categories or the 8 themes that came out of the Satchwell report, where we wanted to at least take apart the report piece by piece and be able to, at least as we go into a media ethics conference, able to have a comprehensive view and an understanding and feedback from various role players of what needs to be done. Now, some of the themes that we looked at were issues of media freedom, including dealing with misinformation. We looked at strengthening our ethics code and the principles. And an important point that the report dealt with was also the safety of journalists. But last but not least, Peter, some of the issues were dealt with around the media sustainability, the sustainability of the media in South Africa, because you know, having seen the damage that COVID-19 has wrought on the industry, what do we do to make sure that beyond this difficult period, we are able to have a sustainable media and an ethical media and a media that continue to produce quality journalism in South Africa. Now, those webinars, we've had all 4 of those webinars, the last one having been on the Wednesday, the 5th of May. Now, we will now have the big media ethics conference where we'll invite our members, journalists, civil society, business to come together under one roof and to discuss some of those recommendations. And what we're looking at, Peter, is to come up with a 5-year action plan of what needs to be done to make sure that South African media is able to thrive beyond this point.
I suppose in the end, what's going to need to happen is that everybody needs to buy into this. And what will there be? Will there be a code of conduct, a book or something that will guide practitioners going forward?
Peter, there's already an ethics code that most media houses adhere to. There's already the press code, which is our guide as journalists in terms of how to conduct ourselves in different situations. And there are a number of other journals and publications that have been produced over time, including a Z card, for instance, which tells us how to deal with the police on a crime scene, but also material on how journalists should conduct themselves in court. So we already have that information, Peter. And also, more importantly, we now have the Satchwell report. So coming out of this will be a 5-year action plan. Of course, it will be in document form of some of the things, some of the deliberations and the debate and suggestions that are coming out of these webinars. Let me make an example, Peter. We are dealing with a media industry now that has been decimated by COVID-19. And as we go into that media ethics conference, already we have come up with a research which looks at different models that we can adopt to ensure that media, not just big media, not big companies, not big broadcasters, but local media, which has been mostly affected by COVID-19, which has been decimated by COVID-19, how do we ensure that those media companies continue to thrive, continue to work in their small localities? Now, some of the things, for instance, that are being that is an establishment of a media sustainability fund, and also this fund which will be able to assist journalists and small guys sitting in small localities to be able to continue working. Some of the recommendations that we're looking at is the possibility of promoting access to public interest news sites, where we are saying that if we all accept that journalism is a public good, therefore, it then makes sense that journalism should be easily accessible to all communities in South Africa. We know that South Africans pay a huge cost for data, and at the same time, we have news sites that have paywalls that are subscription-based. Obviously, we have to pay for good journalism, but we're then saying that at the very least, that South Africans must be met halfway, where we must look at the desirability of zero-rating public interest news websites. Now, those are some of the things that we're looking at. And also, what has been done in other jurisdictions, countries like New Zealand, in the UK, in France, and in Australia, where some of those countries have looked into issues like tax relief, where they actually come up with different tax rebates. For instance, if you buy a newspaper or a media company, a media news subscription, that you get that to be zero rated. So these are some of the different models, different things that we're looking at, Peter, and hoping to ensure that we milk the report and make sure that the report does not exist in a shelf elsewhere, but that it's a living document that helps us move forward as an industry.
Would you say that there's been a general acknowledgement of some of the findings in the Satchwell report that you're trying to address? Because some people will have had to put their hands up and says, you know what, we were guilty of this, and perhaps we dropped the ball and we weren't paying attention, and we do want to come to the party. Is there a general feeling amongst journalists, media owners, that there is a will to move forward?
I think generally the Satchwell report has been well received, Peter. I mean, there have been some concerns raised by a number of individuals, but also some concessions that were made by the judge, for instance, where in some instances the report would make a statement based on various reports, and then the people concerned would came back afterwards and say, no, it's not quite as it reported in the report. So what we've done with issues like that, for instance, when we published the report, we've also been able to publish some of the corrections. But generally, the media industry has been quite open in terms of acknowledging our own flaws. And remember, the very reason why we set up this commission of inquiry was to acknowledge that there have been ethical flaws in the industry, and there have been mistakes that have been made. And also there is a growing and a widening gap and a trust deficit between ourselves and the audiences. So this is part of the process to remedy that, Peter. I mean, for instance, if you talk about, I've mentioned the Sunday Times earlier. The Sunday Times were actually quite open. They availed themselves to the judge. They admitted to some of the mistakes, and they actually were quite open with the process. And of course, some of the media owners that were interviewed in that report, including the media owners of some of the major broadcasters. Unfortunately, the media company that did not participate in that process was independent newspapers. But the reality is, Peter, we understand that the ethical issues and the ethical lapses and the issues that I've enumerated are actually across the board. So that's why what we wanted with this report. And that is why we're trying to make sure that this report does not just become another document that gathers dust. That's why, in the conference that we're having next week, it's not just an echo chamber where as journalists we're talking among ourselves. We are inviting media owners, we're inviting civil society, we're inviting all other interested stakeholders and everyone who actually cares about media freedom and ensuring that in South Africa we have a media industry that continues to do the good work. Because in as much as I have counted and mentioned a number of issues, ethical issues that may arisen in the future. We actually have to look at the work that the journalists have done, the good work that is a result of what we see in the Zondo Commission, some of the cases that are before court. Now, all of those is work that stemmed initially from some of the work that was done by journalists. So it's not to say that all is lost. It's actually to say, how do we enhance what we already have and make sure that beyond this point, we still have a strong, independent, and ethical media that continues quality journalism in this country.
Sbu Ngalwa, Chairperson of SANEF, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we wish you the best with this endeavour, and let's hope that the public start to trust us even more after this process. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Peter.
All right, that's Sbu Ngalwa, the politics editor at Newsroom Africa, and also the SANEF chairperson, about a process that's underway, hopefully to build a 5-year strategy on how to improve the quality of journalism and media ethics going forward. On May the 1st, supporters of two factions of the ruling Patriotic Front political party violently clashed at the party's headquarters in Lusaka, the capital of Zambia, and unidentified members of the crowd attacked Francis Muinga Maingaila, a reporter at the privately owned news website Zambia 24, and Nancy Mawele, who's a reporter at the independent New Vision newspaper. And according to Maingaila, attackers kicked Mawele, causing minor injuries to her leg, and she was able to escape from the scene, according to those sources. Maingaila told the Committee to Protect Journalists that a group of about 10 people stole his camera, wallet and phone and punched and kicked him when he resisted. He was left with swelling on his face and eye. Now, this past week, many African countries joined the world in celebrating World Press Freedom Day, and sadly, as intimidation, threats and assaults by state authorities and non-state actors continue across the continent. In Kenya, Mariel Muller, an East African journalist correspondent for German public broadcaster Deutsche Welle, was shot at and injured by police whilst covering a protest against the police violence in the country. Now, police attacked Muller during an interview at a peaceful protest in the capital, Nairobi. Kenyan police shot at me twice in the leg with a tear gas canister whilst we were doing an interview, Muller said on Twitter, sharing pictures showing her injuries. Now, last year, Kenyan journalist Peter Maina and his colleagues were assaulted by police whilst they were covering a story on how police are using extreme violence whilst enforcing COVID-19 restrictions. Sadly, these and other stories paint a picture of press freedom that is still under threat in Africa. So, Monday the 3rd of May marked World Press Freedom Day, and the day was observed under the theme Information as a Public Good. With this in mind, we thought we'd go back in news history, particularly on August 2010, where the Hawks arrested the then Sunday Times journalist Mzilikazi wa Afrika. And this is how the SABC covered the story.
Sunday Times journalist Mzilikazi wa Afrika remains in police custody. He is scheduled to appear in a Nelspruit court tomorrow morning. He faces charges of fraud and defeating the ends of justice. Now, the police say he's charged in his capacity as an ordinary citizen, not as a journalist. Following journalists' meeting yesterday to deal with what they see as threats to media freedom by proposed law, many among the group have condemned the journalist's arrest and detention.
Media anxious, waiting to hear the fate of Sunday Times journalist Mzilikazi wa Afrika. Media organizations say if reports are correct that there's insufficient evidence to prosecute him, then the police have shot themselves in the foot.
The latest that I've heard is that they don't have apparently sufficient evidence to charge him. If that is the case, Why on earth would you make such a big public issue of going and arresting the man?
Indeed, earlier, prosecutors were reluctant to pursue a case of defeating the ends of justice and fraud against Africa, but that's now changed.
Yes, they were not happy, but after we sat down and engaged with them on the basis of a number of things, they then did see that there is a prima facie case that Mzilikazi or the suspect can answer or should answer. So we are proceeding as planned.
However, a lot will depend on whether the Sunday Times High Court application to release Africa from custody succeeds this evening. Nompumela Losiziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, so that's going back a little bit in time, taking a look at some of the challenges that journalists have been facing over time across the continent, but here in South Africa as well. But the great news, of course, in the latest World Press Index, Freedom Index, what we found is that South Africa is doing phenomenally well. In fact, South Africa now is above countries like the United Kingdom in terms of press freedom. So we certainly have made great progress. But in that clip, you would have seen William Byrd. He was much younger, but let's catch up with him. Oh, we don't have William Byrd. I thought we were going to have William Byrd. So, well, let's take a look at the papers and let's talk to Mutswaki. Ooh, how are you? Are you well?
Good morning. I'm
Good.
well. Good morning. Good morning
to see you again.
Happy Mother's Day to
Yes,
everyone.
happy Mother's Day. It's been a while. So we have little time as usual. So which papers grabbed your attention and why?
I'll start with the City Press. The headline there reads, Magashule tries to break the NEC. And this is the ANC-NEC meeting, which has been underway this weekend. And I thought what was very interesting, you did cover this paper at the start. What was very interesting is that the City Press is also reporting that there were some within the ANC-NEC who were lobbying that if Magashule doesn't get reinstated as the Secretary General, they will try to resign ensemble, forcing the ANC into going to an early elective conference. Now, I don't know where we are now. If you look at the Sunday Times, they also have the ACE, a play of words there with the ANC's now suspended Secretary General's name, that he was booted out of this Zoom meeting. And there were conversations of whether this meeting should go ahead on Zoom or not. And concerns were around the leaking. And as we heard over the weekend, there were some audio which have been played in the media of what had happened at that ANC-NEC meeting. And the question is, does this strengthen President Cyril Ramaphosa's position in the ANC, seeing that the SG is suspended? I guess I don't know. It will be for the viewer to decide.
Yes, that's fascinating. I mean, I guess the challenge for the ANC is there are some people, not now, but before, who have stepped aside, facing criminal charges. And one would think that every single member of the ANC, no matter who he is or she is, must abide by the same rules. And this is probably the thing that they need to manage, especially with those ones in the NEC that are saying that the SG must be allowed to return. Then what about everybody else?
Yes, because again, both the Sunday Times and the City Press do have these lists of names that were submitted to the ANC of members who are currently facing charges of corruption or allegations or fraud. And the list is quite extensive. There were some provinces that didn't submit their names, but I think it would be very interesting for someone to go in and look at who else could possibly be on the line if the ANC goes ahead and really implements the step-aside rule. And I guess what it would mean also for the credibility of the party and the perceived association it has with corruption.
All right, and then another paper?
Another paper is the Sunday World, and I think the story of AKA's fiance who fell off a building is one that's been developing. And now the Sunday World is reporting that there was drugs and violence that were involved. And they've got screenshots of images of AKA with the bruise to the eye. And there's, you see there's a hotel room where there's doors and, things are scattered around. So I think this is one story that we will need to watch and see how it develops. But the Sunday World is saying that an investigation is now pending on the death of Anele Tembe.
Shweshwe, we've run out of time, but thank you so much indeed. Always good to talk to you. Thanks so much, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, take care. All right, so that's your Sunday papers, and in fact, that's your program for today. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. You've been watching Media Monitor. We'll catch you again at the same time next week with more of the same. Stay well, be safe, take care, bye-bye.